Hello, everybody. We're gonna move on to the last stage of our artistic upcycling and repurposed art project. I'm gonna do one last lesson with you before we move on to you actually starting your projects. I'm gonna start with this image. It's quite famous. It's an illusion, and I'm gonna go back to that metaphor I was using last week about I spy and what do you see when you when you look at things. Because this project is a lot of it is about how you see things. Do you see things just as they are, or do you see things as what they could be? So I spy with my little eye an old or young woman. And some people will see the old woman, some people will see the young woman, and once they see one, they can't seem to see the other. Some people will see both. And if you can't see it, I'm going to help you. I'm going to provide some images to help you out. So if you look at it one way, hopefully you can see that this part here, this black part, is actually the woman's hat. And this part here is the young woman's cheek. And this is the young woman's nose. And you can't really see her eyes because she's actually looking away from you to her right, beyond her shoulder. And this is her shoulders here, and this is her neck over here. All right, so some people will see the young woman. And then some people say, oh, I can't see the old woman. What are you talking about? If we move on, it's the same image, but in this case, the shapes of that exact same image, for some people, in their minds, they will resemble the features of an old woman. And if you can't see them, this is supposed to be the eyes of the woman, old woman. This is the big nose of the woman here. And here's the woman's mouth. This is her chin. And this is her, I think it's her hair. And this is some kind of, I don't know what it's called, the thing that they wrap their head with, old ladies sometimes, a shawl, right? And this part here is some kind of a heavy coat she's wearing, right? And in this case, you can see her face, but she's actually looking sort of more towards you, but looking downwards, right? So in this case, I see an old woman. And that whole idea of, seeing one thing versus seeing the possibility of another is kind of what's behind this book here. It's a very simple children's book. I'm just going to play it for you here.
Hey, look, a duck!
That's not a duck, that's a rabbit.
It's totally a duck. See, there's his bill.
What are you talking about? Those are ears, silly.
It's a duck, and he's about to eat a piece of bread.
It's a rabbit, and he's about to eat a carrot.
Wait, listen. Did you hear that? I heard duck sounds.
That's funny, I distinctly heard rabbit sounds.
Now the duck is wading through the swamp.
No, the rabbit is hiding in the grass.
Here, look at the duck through my binoculars.
Sorry, still a rabbit.
Duck,
Rabbit,
duck,
rabbit,
duck,
rabbit,
duck,
rabbit,
duck,
rabbit,
duck.
rabbit.
All right. So this idea of the duck versus the rabbit is actually nothing new. It's just kind of been formatted for kids in a really new way. It's actually based on a fairly old drawing that was an illusion as well, created as an illusion. And you can see this is like an old woodcut, which is like a print. And there's that same idea of a duck and a hare. It looks very much like the from the picture book that I showed you. And again, if you can't see it, I'm going to help you out again. Right? So this part here is like the ears of the hare, and this is the eyes of the hare. Oh, sorry, this is the head of the hare. Whereas here's the eyes of the duck again. But rather than these being rabbit ears, this is more like the bill of the duck. Right? So in this case, the duck is looking this way, whereas in this case, the rabbit's looking the other way. The hare's looking the other way. Right? So a lot of this is the idea of what do you actually see? Do you see it as it is, or do you see what else it could possibly be? right? And the reason our brains see more than one thing is because um, our our minds are constantly looking for recognizable shapes, right? So when we go around and see things, we're trying to make sense of the world around us, and the way we do that is our minds are telling us, oh, this shape must mean this, and this shape must be similar to this, so that means it must mean this. And it's in the same way that our minds can understand this statement here. And if you try to read it, you'll notice that it's actually kind of gibberish, which means they're actually not real words. They're actually poorly misspelled words. And I'm sure most of you can read this actually. And if you can't, I'll give the correctly spelled version beneath. It reads, do you find this simple to read because of the phenomenal power of the human mind? Most people do. Right? And so in the same way that you can actually read most of this, it's because our minds aren't actually reading the exact letters in the exact order. It's actually looking for patterns, and it's saying, oh, well, um, YUO, that sounds and sort of looks like YOU, so it must be you. And FNID, it's not actually FNED, right? That's not a word, but I know that those four letters together make find, and do you find together make sense. And that's how that's how your brain works. It's looking for things that it can recognize all the time, even though in this case, if you actually read it as it is, it makes absolutely no sense. Okay. With this same approach of understanding that our minds are looking for things that we can recognize, things that are similar to what we see, Picasso very much was a master in this, Pablo Picasso. And in this case, he had a toy car. And I know that sounds so bizarre to say that, but he had a toy car. It looked something like one of those old style Volkswagen Beetles. And when he spied with his little eye a toy car, he didn't see just a toy car, right? When he looked at the shape of it and the lights and the kind of windshield here and that kind of round shape, right? It's a very iconic image, iconic style of the Beetle. He actually saw the head of a monkey or a gorilla, I'm not sure. And if you see, this is actually one of his sculptures, and you can see the car or a car-like thing that he's used for the shape of the head. The kind of the rims make the kind of part of the mandible, I guess, and then he's added ears onto the back part. This part here, he's kind of added some eyeballs, but I mean, you can very much see the bumper here looks like I guess the mouth, right? And I'm assuming he's put it on some kind of a giant sphere that makes a ball, or that was a ball at some point, and then he's added other little bits and pieces to complete it, right? So that's, the genius of Picasso. He's able to see not just a car, but by looking at the shape and by looking at the form, his mind sees something else that is very similar to that, right? And that's what allows him to create these really amazing sculptures, to reinterpret and repurpose probably something that his son threw out or didn't want to play with anymore. Or maybe he did, and he just kind of said, I want it because I'm going to make a sculpture out of it. Okay, so here's Picasso again, and in this case, he's spying with his little eye a handlebar for a bicycle. All right, now I've taken two pictures to show you. So this is what it normally looks like in context, and if you take it off of the, I don't know what this part's called, and if you take off all the brakes and stuff like that, this is the kind of shape you're left with. So the question is, what did Picasso see when he saw something like that? Right? And it turns out that when he looked at that kind of form, Picasso ended up seeing the horns of a bull, right? And you'll notice what he did was he actually turned it upside down, right? And I don't know if you can recognize this, but it's actually a bicycle seat as well. And by putting the bicycle seat and the kind of handlebars together, he creates a sculpture that looks very much like a bull's head, right? Here's the horn, and here's the eyes, here's the nose / snout and the mouth, right? Now it helps as well the way it was photographed because it casts a shadow that almost looks like the bull's body. That helps a lot, okay? But again, you can see it's only actually made of two pieces. but by carefully looking at and things like the form and the shape, right? You can He was able to repurpose what was probably junk for somebody, and turn it into a really, really amazing piece of art. And so for that reason, that Picasso didn't see an object for what it was meant to be. He often looked at the shape and form of objects and what they could be, and not what they actually were, or had been, or were meant to be. And there's a storybook about him, and in the storybook, at one point, they talk about why in his art studio, this is one room that's just filled with junk. And it's junk to most people, broken TVs, this guitar looks broken, um, like random things. But to him, it wasn't junk. To him, all those shapes and forms were all kinds of possibilities and ideas for things that he could transform and repurpose into art. Now here's another little children's book I'm going to show you, and it's really short and it's kind of fun, but it takes this idea of um, taking something and reinterpreting and seeing it in a different way by kind of modifying it. All right, so I'm just going to play this for you now.
14 animals that are definitely not an octopus. Here are 14 animals I found. There are many animals here, but I am sure of one thing. None of these animals are an octopus. This flamingo? Definitely not an octopus. And this couldn't be an octopus, because it is a fox. Here comes a snail. That is certainly not an octopus. Is this an octopus? No, it's just a little snake. No octopus here, just a camel. And this is for sure an ostrich. Nothing else. Here is a rhino. It's not an octopus either. And this is just a squid. Definitely a squid. I am...
So I'm just going to pause it here so I can talk about it. But the genius of this illustrator in this book is that he's able to look at the shapes. So in this case, it's the shape of the octopus. And he's able to repurpose all those parts, the 8 tentacles, right? It's almost like those people that those balloon sculptors that take those simple balloons and kind of stretch them, twist them, bend them, repurpose them to create these amazing forms. That's kind of like what he's doing almost. It's almost like he's repurposing balloons, right? In this case, he's repurposing the head to make the body, the squirrel. 2 of the tentacles become the bushy tail. 2 more tentacles become the paws. Sorry, the paws here. And then 2 more then become the, what are these called? The feet, I guess. And then 2 more still, the last 2 become its head. And its little, I don't know what you call that, the kind of bit of fur on the top, right? So really, really genius. By looking at its shape and by transforming the rest, he repurposes those shapes into something else, just like those balloon artists that we often see. I don't have no idea how they do that. I wish I could do that.
very sure this is a regular squirrel and not an octopus. And here is a frog. Definitely just a frog. This isn't an octopus. It's a giraffe. And this is totally a monkey. not an octopus. Psst. See this praying mantis? I'm positive it's not an octopus. And this porcupine. Actually, this porcupine looks a little funny. I think it might be... It is! It is an octopus!
Okay, so you kind of got the idea, right? It's a cute little book. It's for young kids, obviously, but that idea of looking at something and looking at the shape, looking at the form, and not thinking about what actually is it, instead thinking of what could it look like, what else could it be, what could part of it, become, right? That's kind of what designers often do. They look at shapes, forms, instead of, being limited to, what's in front of you. So in this case, a lot of you know that I really like Lego, and I think of it as a way to sculpt, actually. And the designers I think of almost as like, they've evolved from Picasso's way of seeing things. And I'll show you why. So this is an example that I'm going to give you here. It's a green frog, right? I mean, what else could it be? It's a green frog. But if you look at the shape, right, it's this kind of really organic shape. It's definitely not geometric. Doesn't look like a brick at all, right? And so this one designer realized that by recoloring it and making it pink, he was actually able to create what ends up looking like the blossoms on a cherry blossom tree. And if you can't see it, there are some darker pink flowers, but it's the lighter pink ones that are actually the frogs. And if you still can't see, I'm just going to zoom in a bit more. There we go. So you can see all these pink frogs here, actually, right? But if you go back, it actually looks very natural, right? Because of its organic shape and because of its size and because of the way it's arranged in the leaf, right? So frog isn't always a frog, or it doesn't have to be at least. Right? So that's a great example of repurposing a part and making it look like something completely different because you've changed your mindset. You've changed the way you look at it. Here's another piece I'm going to show you. So this just looks like some kind of a bucket that you would put on a minifigure's head, right? And it sits on its back. This Lego designer saw something else, actually. And they actually saw their version of what ends up becoming the body of a caterpillar or a section of a caterpillar, right? The way this caterpillar kind of has those sections that kind of expand and contract, right? Obviously it helped it was in green as well, but that kind of shape and the kind of little ridge, and by putting them kind of one after another, that's kind of what they were able to see, right? So really fascinating. Obviously they've added other bits to help too, like the branch and the leaf too. Okay. So the question is, how do you take something like, cardboard, which a lot of us get now because, we're ordering things online still. We can't really go out shopping. How do you take something like cardboard, which probably we have a lot of, and turn it into, upcycle it and repurpose it into art? And we're going to instead this time look at 3 more elements that we didn't look at last time. Form, texture, and space. All right. And we're going to use these 3 specifically to turn what is just, for most of us, a recyclable throwaway box into something that is quite artistic. Now, before we get to that, I do want to show you something else. So here are some examples of real student projects, right? They're from older kids. So they've got what looks like a cake, an old style rotary telephone, and I think it's supposed to be a portrait with glasses and hair. Okay, and I know some of you are thinking I can't do that, and I understand. Keep in mind that these are, this type of project is more of a level 4 type project, because unlike the ones I've shown you up until now, unlike the finding something and kind of upcycling it by changing its color or changing the way you use line. This is hard, actually. It's quite difficult. So these are challenging, and they're much more. It's more in the level 4 range. This style project. Okay, just to kind of show you what really is possible. Here's a Japanese artist.
あんまり私褒められたことがなかったんですけど、段ボールで物を作った時に学校の先生からすごく褒めてもらって、なんかこれ面白いからちょっとやってみたらっていう風にちょっと周りからも支えてもらったりだとかして、とにかく褒められるのが嬉しくて今まで続いてるような感じです。見せてあげたいっていうのが私の中に別テーマがあるので、ちょっと断面を潰して丸みを出してあげて、段ボールが可愛く映るように作品を作っています。作ると丸みを作るっていうのがすごく難しいんです。アニメのキャラクターとか綾波レイの段ボールで作った等身大とか、丸みを帯びて人体っぽい形のものっていうのを作ってみたいなっていうのは思ってます。
Well, that was great. And the reason I wanted to show that to you was for you to understand that that's what a professional artist would do with cardboard. So just to kind of help, give you some context that although this looks difficult, it's nothing like what a real artist would do, right? So this is totally doable for a lot of you if you kind of have the patience and you have the kind of drive to do it, all right? Okay, let's just skip this. Whoops. Oh. Next page. Okay, so what we're going to do now is, before we get on to the actual construction part of your final project, we're going to look at those three more elements. And the first one I want to look at with you, and you're going to be taking some photographs in a moment to kind of demonstrate your understanding, is form. We've looked at shape before, and think of form as the 3D version of shape. So a circle would be a shape that we looked at, a geometric shape, but if something has form, it looks three-dimensional. And there's certain ways we can make it look three-dimensional. So if you think of math, shape would be area, right? Whereas form would be calculating volume, right? It's because it has the depth right here, okay? So to help you understand how you can demonstrate form and how you can create form, you can light an object in such a way that the light strikes the object and creates shadows which help reveal the form, the roundness of the object. Similar eggs here, they have very little shadows. They look very flat, except for maybe this part over here, right? But you can see there's a big difference between the two. This one almost looks like pieces of cardboard that are cut out, right? So shadows are really important to revealing the form. They will help you. Another technique that people use is they show the edge or the thickness to help reveal the form. And to help you understand, if you don't have that thickness and you only have that kind of top surface, you can see it ends up looking really, really flat. Except for this part here, which, because it has a shadow, it looks more three-dimensional, right? So if you want to create something that looks three-dimensional, show its edge, show its depth, or show its thickness. Don't just show one side of it. And what that might mean is, like in this case, you kind of tilt it and turn it at an angle so you see more than one side. Whereas here you only see one side and it looks really flat. Okay, so what I'm going to give you now is 5 minutes or so, 5 to 7 minutes. I'm going to ask you to take 2 pictures for me, right? I'd like you to take one where the object is very, very flat and shows no form, right? You're only showing one side, or it's lit in such a way where you see no shadows. And I'd like you to take a second picture of that same object, but this time just take a picture in a way where you can see the form. So either light it so that you can see the shadow really easily, or turn it and light it in a way where you can see the edges and the thickness and the shadow as well. Okay, so I'm going to give you 7 minutes. Actually, maybe I'll give you 10 minutes to do this. So take 10 minutes, go and do that, and we will see you back in 10 minutes time. Okay, the second element we're going to look at is space. Sometimes people think of it as depth. And the reason I've got this picture here is our minds recognize that the same thing, in this case the stop sign, if it's shrinking, meaning it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, the higher and higher up it gets, our minds tell us, oh, that means it's far away, which means the space here is not flat. It appears to be getting deeper and farther away. It's actually a large space. It's very deep. It's like you could take your hand and reach right into it, right? So we want to create this illusion of space, even though we're taking a flat photograph, right? So one way we can do that is by setting up our photograph and setting up our object so that we have similar objects but set up in a different way. So if you've got, obviously you're not going to have a hot air balloon, but let's say you have one object and the same object but place it farther away. When you take the photograph from one side, you'll see the closer one larger and the farther one much smaller. And so what ends up happening is this picture here, you'll see it looks deep compared to this picture here, where both of them are the same size and the picture looks very flat. Another way to create depth, so it's actually similar to the first one. Another way to create depth is rather than just have things next to each other, like in this case, by overlapping them, and you also end up creating shadows, by overlapping them, your mind tells you, oh, this cube and this sphere is in front of the cylinder. Whereas here, you can't really tell how, if things are far or close, they all look the same kind of distance away, right? So objects that show no overlap look really flat, whereas objects that overlap, they show depth. Okay, so I'm going to have you take 2 photographs now. I'd like you to take one where the objects are, the objects that you choose, one of them is far away and one of them is close. Far away, small, close, big. And so you're showing a lot of depth that way. And I'd like you to do a second photograph where you've got the objects that are overlapping as another way to show depth and create the illusion of space as well. Okay, so take 10 minutes and take 2 of those photographs, and we'll see you in 10 minutes again. Okay, the last one I'm going to show you is a little bit easier. It's about texture. And texture is about the quality of the surface, right? So in this case, they actually have the exact same texture. However, because it's a manhole cover and the way it's been placed is not identical to the other existing texture, it looks like a different texture. And so by changing the texture, even though it's a flat surface, we can tell people, or we can suggest to people that they're different surfaces, right? This one here, the change in texture is much more dramatic and obvious, right? The texture of the waves, they're very fluid, whereas the texture of the rocks, they're very solid, right? So by changing the texture, you can show that, you know, they're 2 different surfaces. It's very obvious, okay? So I'm gonna ask you to take 5 minutes, take one photograph where you take two things of two different texture and you lay them on top of each other so that you can easily tell them apart from each other, as opposed to just putting two sheets of blank paper on top of each other and not being able to tell. Okay, so go do that now. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Okay, so just to recap, if you choose to go this route, it's the more challenging route, but it's also something that can enable you to approximate level 4 quality work, because it's quite hard to do. It's much harder to do, right? Where you're going to create something out of objects, and it doesn't have to be cardboard, but you're going to create something out of objects and you're going to repurpose them in such a way that you can create something new, something that is recognizable, and something that was not meant to be its original purpose. So in other words, don't take a phone and make it into another phone, right? It's already a phone. Whereas if you were to take a phone and transform it into something else, like, for example, if the headset became like the ears or a pair of ears, right? And you had two of them, for instance, that would be the beginning of transforming it. Obviously, you can add stuff to it, right? But if you're one of those people that has that kind of eye where you can kind of see possibilities, this will really kind of help you excel. Whereas the other, what we've been doing up till now, things like altered books, they're much easier to do, right? It's harder to get a level 4 for that. Okay, so keep that in mind, and we will talk some more later.